Bom dia a todos, a todas e a todos. Sejam bem-vindos ao evento Metaletramento e as perspectivas da ciência da informação na era digital. Nós somos da equipe da comissão organizadora do nosso encontro e estamos aqui para ajudar no que for necessário. O meu nome é Azir, eu estou aqui também com a Milena Gomes, com a Dirnelli Gomes, com a Daniele Cunha e com a Cecília Barros. Nós estamos disponíveis para apoiar as suas ações de moderação, a abertura de espaço para os usuários realizarem suas perguntas, assim como na marcação do tempo, na reunião e leitura das perguntas e no controle dos áudios. Nós pedimos a todas, a todos e a todos os participantes da sessão para que mantenham seus microfones desligados. Caso seja possível, pedimos que usem os fones de ouvido. O fone ele é fundamental para o controle do áudio e ele evita microfonias e duplicações do som. Pedimos também que respeitem o tempo de fala. Atenção, essa é uma informação muito importante. Essa sessão atual está sendo gravada e transmitida através da empresa Google via plataforma YouTube. A presença na sala ela é voluntária e de total responsabilidade de cada pessoa. Esse protocolo ele já foi previamente encaminhado a cada um. Mas confirmamos que a partir da presença na sala de transmissão e de gravação, cada pessoa declara autorizar o uso de sua imagem, ou vídeo, ou áudio, sem finalidade comercial, para que possa ser utilizada pelo PPGCI, IBICT, UFRJ e pela ANSIB. A presente autorização é concedida a título gratuito, abrangendo o uso da imagem acima mencionada em todo o território nacional e também no exterior. Nós pedimos que, se você discorde do registro de gravação e de transmissão, nos informe, nós vamos compreender. Nesse caso, nós pedimos que não permaneça na sala e que nos comunique através do contato enancib2021@bict.br, tanto a sua discordância quanto a justificativa. Quem estiver de acordo com a transmissão, nós pedimos que permaneça na sala. Gostaria de mais uma vez avisar que nós já estamos no ar, desejar uma ótima sessão para todos e um bom dia.
Bom dia a todos. Eu gostaria de começar, primeiro, agradecendo a presença dos nossos professores e autores do livro que o IBICT traduziu e lançou no 21º Enancib, falar da importância desse evento para a nossa área e agradecer a todos que, de alguma forma, estão participando conosco, estão nos assistindo, e, mais especialmente, a equipe técnica que faz acontecer, e ao Gustavo Saldanha, que é o coordenador da COEP, responsável pela coordenação geral deste evento. Eu queria, assim que terminar a minha fala, pedir a Daniela Cunha, que fará a tradução para que todos, quem fala inglês ou não, possam participar dessa palestra. Os nossos convidados são autores, professores americanos, extremamente reconhecidos pelo seu trabalho na área de competência, na área de metalinguagem, e através da Universidade de Brasília, do curso de doutorado, de uma doutoranda que está fazendo seu trabalho em cima disso, nos trouxe, e nós achamos extremamente importante nesse pós-Enancib, que desde o seu, não me lembro agora o ano, mas enfim, já há alguns anos tem trabalhado essa área após o Enancib. E é com muito prazer, com muita alegria, que a gente recebe os nossos convidados. Dani, é com você.
On behalf of the director of the Brazilian Institute of Information in Science and Technology, IBICT, Research Unit of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, MCTI, I have to say that Dr. Cecilia Leite is honored to have you here in this presentation, part of the 21 National Meeting of Research and Graduate Studies in Information Science, Enancib. We now open this presentation with the distinguished professors and authors of the book Metaliteracy, Reinventing Information Literacy to Empower Students, Dr. Thomas McKee and Dr. Trudy Jacobson. You can now start your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are thrilled to be here today, and we are honored by the invitation. I'm Tom Mackey, Professor of Arts and Media at Empire State College, and I'm joined by my colleague, Trudy Jacobson.
Eles estão honrados de estar aqui nessa apresentação e vão agora começar a sua apresentação com a doutora Trudy e o Dr. Tom Mackey.
So to begin, we are going to look at meta-literacy and the perspectives of information science in the digital age. So we'll be talking about the development of the meta-literacy concept and the book translated.
Eles vão falar sobre o metaletramento e a perspectiva de ciência da informação e sobre o livro que eles escreveram.
And to start, we decided that we wanted to start with a central question: why meta-literacy? And Trudy is going to start with part of the answer to that.
A questão central que eles estão dizendo agora é sobre a questão do metaletramento. Então, ele vai começar agora falando um pouco sobre isso.
Trudy, you're muted.
I think we have a video to show you, but I think that now that you have started the presentation, we can show the video at the end of it. What do you think, Professor?
Sure, that's fine with me. Is that okay with you, Trudy?
Certainly.
Thank you.
So as you can see in this quote, there's concerns about information literacy. This was back in 2002, and the idea of information literacy has evolved over time. But as it says here, information literacy as practiced is too limited. It is grounded in text and basic skills. And so it doesn't really encompass all that is needed by individuals to understand the current information environment.
O letramento informacional praticado é muito limitado, fundamentado em texto e excessivamente preocupado em transmitir habilidades básicas, para abranger totalmente o visual, o interativo e os domínios culturais exigidos pela situação atual.
And this slide continues the idea that literacies become outdated. So this is from slightly earlier than Markham's quote. This is 2000 and from the American Library Association. But this was a long-standing set of essentially skills for information literacy: determining information needing, accessing it, evaluating it, incorporating and using it, and then understanding it. And as we're going to be talking further, you will see that really much more is needed than what is indicated in these 6 skills.
A professora Trudy está dizendo que o letramento se torna desatualizado quando um indivíduo letrado em informações é capaz de determinar a extensão das informações necessárias, acessar as informações de forma eficaz e eficiente, avaliar as informações e suas fontes de maneira crítica, incorporar informações selecionadas em sua base de conhecimento, usar as informações de forma eficaz para o cumprimento de um propósito específico, compreender as questões econômicas, jurídicas, sociais que cercam o uso de informações e acessar e usar as informações de forma ética e legal. Esse é dos slides que ela está mencionando.
And another issue that we were trying to address in that very first article and also in the first book was this idea that literacies are often designed separately and seem to have different purposes. For instance, these are just a few examples. Digital literacies is very specific, focusing on digital skills. Information literacy, again, was very focused on text, search and retrieval. And then media literacy with an emphasis on multimedia and digital media, and of course, visual literacy. And part of the idea of having a meta literacy was this idea of a more comprehensive approach to literacy, so that we could find what are some of the common characteristics among all of these different literacy types. And that was part of the initial investigation. And part of it too was, again, trying to move information literacy forward as a meta literacy, so that there are ways of connecting to try and move information literacy beyond text, to think of the digital aspect, the media aspect, and of course, the visual aspect in today's environment.
Esse slide ele aborda a questão do letramento, que é desenhado separadamente, dividido em áreas, como o letramento digital, o letramento informacional, o letramento midiático e o letramento visual. Ele menciona, o professor Thomas menciona, que todas essas áreas levam para o metaletramento.
And so the very first article on meta-literacy that really introduced the concept, and we don't really know where the time has gone because this was from 2011, so 10 years ago, this idea of reframing information literacy as a meta-literacy. So we really saw this work grounded in efforts to really move information literacy forward. So at the time, I think we captured some of these key concepts that are still relevant today in how we define meta-literacy. So our approach was to try and challenge those skills-based approach to information literacy that was very common in the information literacy standards at the time. And something unique, again, to the digital environment, the social environment that we had moved into, we really wanted to promote effective participation in social media and online communities. Clearly, that concern is still relevant today, 10 years later. And also, as part of that, we really wanted to support the ability to acquire, produce, and share knowledge collaboratively. So it's not just search and retrieval, it's also what a learner can do in this environment as an active producer of information and someone who shares information in a responsible way and in a collaborative way.
Professor Thomas disse que esse é artigo escrito em 2011 que fala sobre o reformulando o letramento da informação como metaletramento. E ele menciona os desafios baseados em letramento, abordagens, o letramento informacional, a promoção da participação efetiva em mídia social e comunidades virtuais online, e o apoio à aquisição, produção e compartilhamento de conhecimento colaborativo. Ele falou que isso são questões chaves na questão do metaletramento.
So as our work continued with this concept, the idea of a meta-literacy really just opened the door for us and how we thought about this. And we really thought that this idea of the meta and meta-literacy offered so much potential. So a few years later, we continued working on the very first book about meta-literacy, and this one that we're so honored that you have translated. So one of the concepts related to meta and really working with that prefix is that one of the definitions, the Greek origins of the word means after. And so this worked nicely with what we were trying to do in terms of trying to evolve these concepts so that literacy is generally understood as reading and writing. Information literacy had this strong emphasis on search and retrieval. So meta-literacy is really what happens beyond those abilities, and it's really intended to promote the collaborative production and sharing of information, and as a result of that, really producing knowledge as part of that process.
Professor Thomas diz que enquanto o letramento está focado na leitura e na escrita, o letramento informacional enfatiza fortemente a recuperação e a pesquisa. O metaletramento é sobre o que acontece além dessas habilidades em promover a produção colaborativa e o compartilhamento de informações. Metaletramento reinventando a alfabetização informacional, como forma de capacitar e empoderar os alunos.
And now Trudy is going to discuss another key aspect of the meta and meta-literacy.
So we've talked about moving away from the idea of skills and this idea of being able to think about one's own literacy, to understand where one is strong and where one needs to make improvements and engage in further learning. And so we're going to be talking a fair amount about metacognition, which is thinking about one's own learning and one's own thinking. But this is a truly critical component of metaliteracy, to be able to reflect on sort of where one is and where one would like to be.
A professora Trudy está falando da questões que vão muito além das habilidades. A questão está onde o aluno está e onde ele quer estar. E ela fala muito de metacognição, que isso vai ser visto agora mais para frente nos outros slides.
So earlier I mentioned the 2000 definition of information literacy from the American Library Association. In 2015, this framework for information literacy for higher education was released. I was the co-chair of the task force that worked on this with a really wonderful group of librarians and people with library degrees from other fields. But here you can see the definition of information literacy has evolved. So information literacy is the set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective, so the metacognitive, discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information in creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. So this is a big change from the 2000 definition. But as you can see on the right, from the introduction to this framework, it really emphasizes that the framework draws significantly upon the concept of metaliteracy. And one of those elements is the metacognition. The other is the idea of learner as producer.
Professora Trudy diz que essa definição é de 2000 da American Library Association, ela era co-presidente, e depois voltando ao mesmo definição em 2015, o letramento da informação é definido como um conjunto de habilidades integradas que abrangem a descoberta reflexiva de informações, a compreensão de como a informação é produzida e avaliada, e o uso de informações na criação de novos conhecimentos e a participação eticamente em comunidades de aprendizagem. Ela também fala que essa estrutura atrai significativamente sobre o conceito de metaletramento. E, mais uma vez, ela fala da metacognição.
And as the metaliteracy concept, the model evolved, we developed several core components that I'm going to discuss next.
Professor Thomas agora vai falar sobre os componentes principais do metaletramento.
And this is now the fully integrated model that has all of the key components, and we'll be talking through this. Again, it's grounded in that very first article, and in the book, several of these components are actually introduced, and then we develop them further beyond that first book. So in this concept, this conceptualization, this model, the meta-literate learner is at the center, and we see it as the meta-literate learner is really surrounded by these 4 domains of learning. So the metacognitive, the cognitive, the behavioral, and the affective. And Trudy will be talking about that in an upcoming slide, but it's important to look here that the meta and meta-literacy is very much metacognition, but we look at it within the context of the whole person. So we look at metacognition within the sphere of cognitive abilities, behavioral, and also affective. And that next ring outside of the 4 domains are really the characteristics of the meta-literate learner. So being adaptable to new technology, open to learning situations, informed, reflective. Those characteristics are in many ways what we want learners to gain as a meta-literate learner, kind of the outcome of their work. And then the outer ring is really the roles of the meta-literate learner. So, and most of these evolved from the idea of learner as producer. So that was really, in many ways, the first role that we thought about, but then we expanded it to related roles such as publisher, researcher, participant, communicator, translator, author, and teacher.
Ok, o professor Thomas agora fala do modelo de metaletramento e as características do aluno metaletrado. Ele mostra esse mapa, né, esse chart, né, esse disco, com todas as características do aluno metaletrado, que ele é o produtor, ele é o editor, ele é o pesquisador, ele é o participante, é o comunicador, é o tradutor, é o autor, é o professor, e também fala das características reflexiva, da mente cívica, adaptável, quando a pessoa é aberta, produtiva, informada, colaborativa, participativa, e que todos isso levam à metacognição, a cognição em si, e que mais para frente a gente vai estar vendo as outras características. E que isso está mencionado no livro, e foi um dos primeiros artigos mencionados.
So Tom had mentioned the learning domains, and as you can see, this has been extracted from the full model. This is the layer just sort of beyond, or the ring just beyond that central meta-literate learner concept. We've talked a bit about some of these domains already. If you look at the right-hand side of this diagram, the cognitive, and this is what learners should know when they've finished a learning activity. It's the thinking part of the process, and the behavioral, what learners should be able to do after they've learned something, or perhaps the behaviors they engage in as they are learning. These were the 2 domains that were emphasized in earlier skill-based models of information literacy. So we have really emphasized the affective, and that is sort of emotions and feelings and how one feels as one engages in the learning and once one has learned. And then the metacognitive at the top left. And we've talked about that, the reflection on one's own thinking and one's learning. And by really adding those components, the domains on the left-hand side, it has made this a much richer model, and is really a very core element of meta-literacy, and something that learners often don't think about. So it's very empowering.
A professora Trudy, ela agora fala desse diagrama, né, e as diferentes camadas desse diagrama como domínios do metaletramento. Ela enfatizou muito a questão da metacognitividade, né, o metacognitivo, o que os alunos pensam sobre seu próprio pensamento, uma reflexiva compreensão de como e por que eles aprendem, o que eles fazem e não sabem, o seu preconceito e como continuar a aprender. A questão das mudanças nas emoções dos alunos ou as atitudes através do engajamento com as atividades de aprendizagem. Enfim, o que os alunos devem saber sobre a conclusão bem-sucedida das suas atividades de aprendizagem, a sua compreensão, sua organização, sua aplicação e sua avaliação. Ou a questão comportamental, o que os alunos devem ser capazes de fazer após o sucesso da conclusão da sua aprendizagem, nas atividades, nas suas habilidades e nas suas competências.
And these are the roles. Tom mentioned these as he was talking about the full model of meta-literacy. He mentioned that many of these developed from the idea of learner as producer, and we have just finished working on a book on that topic. But you can see that there are a variety of different types of roles. And again, learners often do not think of themselves in this way. So, communicator, are you communicating well with somebody? Are you doing it conscientiously? Are you engaging in communication in a variety of different forums? Are you an author? Why are you an author? Are you informing? Are you engaging in dialogue? Are you trying to persuade somebody? The researcher, which is called out on the top left, when you are researching, are you looking for things that challenge your own biases? Are you the affective can really play a role here if you are doing that. So, that these work together, although they're pulled out separately in the diagram. And then the idea of producer. And often learners are producers, but do not think of themselves as such. So here we even mention things like selfie or digital images, video, that they may not recognize themselves as a producer as they do these things.
Ok, nesse diagrama, a professora Trudy, ela fala muito da questão dos papéis, das funções dos alunos de metaletramento. Ela começa com o comunicador. Como é que o comunicador vê o seu papel como alguém que comunica conscientemente e conscienciosamente numa variedade de fóruns. Depois ela menciona o autor, porque como ele se sente compelido a ser um autor. Ele gostaria de entreter, de informar, de transmitir uma mensagem, de envolver-se em um diálogo, de persuadir. Mais à frente, ela fala do pesquisador, né? O pesquisador pergunta questões críticas para desafiar seus próprios preconceitos dos outros, e desafiar os preconceitos que podem ser presentes no conteúdo que ele vai descobrir. Depois vem o produtor, se ele produz para compartilhar seu próprio conteúdo, como selfies, imagens digitais, vídeos, ou a questão da multimídia, né? E depois aí tem os vários papéis no diagrama, né? Que é o pesquisador, o participante, o comunicador, o tradutor, o autor, o professor, o colaborador, o produtor e o que publica, né? Então, essas são esse é o diagrama do aluno metaletrado.
And those components that Trudy just discussed were just introduced in that first meta-literacy book and continued to develop as the idea moved forward. The last key, or one of the, another key component that we added later that I think was probably always embedded, but we really needed to call it out, was this idea of the meta-literate learner characteristics. And these, interestingly, these ideas really were part of the book we did on the post-truth world, so meta-literate learning in the post-truth world. And again, so much had changed with the information environment. There's much more awareness about misinformation and disinformation, that those ideas, I think, informed the characteristics and then also the goals and objectives that I'll discuss next. But the characteristics, as you can see, these are closely aligned with the meta-literate learner roles. So learner as producer really leads one to thinking about and to achieving this idea of striving toward being productive. And being productive in many different ways in terms of user-generated content, being collaborative, as an informed producer. Again, the informed characteristic is very much focused on the research that an individual does as part of this process. Being collaborative, again, very closely aligned with the collaborator role, but this is something that one strives toward as a characteristic, as a goal. Being participatory, reflective, and a key one, again, that was within the context of this post-truth world, was really thinking about an individual's responsibilities to one's community. So that's why we built into this idea of being civic-minded. So it's not enough to be connected. It's really about having an individual think about what are our responsibilities to our communities. And that can be local communities, it can be online communities, social communities. Connectivity is not enough. We really need to be thinking about those responsibilities.
Professor Thomas, ele agora menciona as características do aluno metaletrado, que ele disse que foi um componente discutido no seu livro. Foi uma camada adicionada depois, pois muita coisa mudou no ambiente. Ele fala da questão do aluno metaletrado no mundo pós-verdade. Ele menciona a questão do aluno produtivo, aquele que suporta ser um criativo e informado produtor de informação, enquanto reflete sobre seu trabalho, seu próprio pensamento durante o processo. Depois, aí tem a outra característica, que é a mente cívica, o aluno que reforça as responsabilidades cívicas, a prestação de contas com a comunidade. Ele menciona muito a questão tanto da comunidade local, a conectividade não é o bastante, e a dimensão ética é essencial para esse aluno. Depois tem a questão do aluno colaborativo, que reforça o diálogo entre os participantes e o papel compartilhado, tanto dele quanto do professor, na qual os alunos são co-criadores de conhecimento. Depois ele fala da questão do aluno reflexivo, que promove o pensamento sobre o próprio pensamento e autorregulável da própria aprendizagem, aquele que apoia a habilidade de identificar e expandir as suas áreas do conhecimento. E, novamente, no diagrama, todas aquelas funções, né? O produtor, o informante, o colaborativo, participativo, reflexivo, de mente cívica, as características, né? Adaptável e aberto.
And then the last core component we will discuss are really the meta-literacy goals and learning objectives. And there are 4 main goals and then related associated learning objectives. In many ways, this is where the scaffolding of learning takes place and where we really apply, I think in a very practical sense, how to activate these, the concepts that we've been exploring. It is also worth noting that the goals and learning objectives also were revised around the same time as the Post-Truth book, 2018, because we recognized a need to really strengthen several aspects to deal with the kind of misinformation and disinformation partisan divides that we've been experiencing. So just mentioning the goals, the first one is really, again, evaluating content while also evaluating one's own biases. So again, that requires a reflective understanding of oneself to really investigate bias. Goal 2, engage with all intellectual property ethically and responsibly. So as both a consumer of information, so someone who is acquiring information, but also as a producer, what are the ethical aspects and responsibilities of producing and sharing information. Goal 3, producing and sharing information in collaborative and participatory environments. So that's one of the goals, and the related objectives support that goal, so that we encourage learners to see themselves as producers of information. And goal 4 for meta-literacy, this is really, again, a kind of self-reflective process that encourages individuals to really develop their own learning strategies to meet their lifelong personal and professional goals, so that they really internalize the process and consider it a lifelong practice. And it's important to note, too, that there's been interest in the goals and objectives, and we have several translations of the goals and objectives, including one by Helda, who translated the goals and objectives in Portuguese. So we're very excited about that. Thank you.
Professor Thomas, ele agora fala sobre a questão do metaletramento, das metas do metaletramento e os objetivos de aprendizagem. Ele disse que isso foi escrito em 2018 no livro, no seu livro. Ele fala da questão das metas, em como avaliar ativamente o conteúdo, enquanto avalia um de seus preconceitos. A outra meta, a meta 2, a questão do engajamento com toda a propriedade intelectual, eticamente e responsavelmente. A meta 3, que é a produção e compartilhamento de informações em ambientes participativos e colaborativos. E a meta 4, que é o desenvolvimento de estratégias de aprendizagem para atingir as suas metas pessoais e objetivos profissionais, sempre encorajando o aluno a se internalizar com seus pensamentos e com seus objetivos.
As Tom mentioned, with goal 4, the idea of developing lifelong learning strategies, this slide just points out that meta-literacy is really all-encompassing, so all stages, all aspects of an individual's life. It's not limited to the academic realm, nor is it something that you learn once and for all, because things change constantly. And so it's sort of a set of goals that one is striving for and continues to strive for. Mentioning the academic realm, I just wanted to go back and refer to the ACRL Information Literacy Framework. That one is more focused on academics, although it can be used in all aspects of one's life. But meta-literacy really is emphasized in that way.
A professora Trudy, ela voltou aqui para a meta 4, mencionada pelo professor Thomas, na questão do desenvolvimento de estratégias de aprendizagem para atingir as metas pessoais. E ela diz que ela fala não somente da questão da aprendizagem, mas também em todos os aspectos da vida do aluno. Que é importante ele ter essas metas para atingir tanto seus objetivos profissionais quanto pessoais.
And we've referred briefly so far in the presentation to the impact on learners. And so we have a couple of slides here that bring this home more directly. So the idea of meta-literate learners as collaborators is one that students think about as they are asked to work in this way. So this is a quote from a student, Jackson Gray, from a course that I just taught earlier this semester. And in this course, the students are working on improving Wikipedia articles. And so he talks about the different roles of meta-literacy, collaborator being one of them, has helped him to work more productively and with more intention.
A questão do estudante, né, o colaborador de metaletramento. A professora Judy fala que, pensando nos diferentes papéis que o metaletramento tem, também me ajudou a trabalhar mais produtivamente, com mais intenções. Anteriormente, ela tinha mencionado, né, a questão do metaletramento a todos os estágios e as facetas da vida de um indivíduo, não se limitando só ao seu reino acadêmico, mas algo aprendido de uma vez por todas.
And this is an example of a meta-literacy in practice in a course that I co-teach with one of my colleagues at SUNY Empire State College, Dr. Sheila Aird, who is our European program director in Prague. So we bring students together from Prague in the United States and fully online, and they develop digital narratives really about their lives. So we've embedded meta-literacy throughout this course so that students first, they produce a intro video where they introduce themselves, and they go beyond that by identifying with a specific learner role. At the halfway point in the course, they do a midterm self-assessment and they reflect on learning domains. They do a final collaborative project, and as part of that, we have them in the discussion address the collaborator role based on questions that have been developed and are available on metaliteracy.org. And then they do a final self-assessment video based on the characteristics. So they engage with all the elements of meta-literacy and talk through those. I'm going to try, and this is a very short video. If I can, I will try this. This is a student who talks about how she identifies with being a producer.
In the world of meta-literacy, I would consider myself a producer. As an artist, I've been using social media to promote my work since 2017. Through Instagram, I landed gigs, I got invited to participate in exhibitions, and collaborate with other artists. It's been very rewarding. When I first opened my Instagram account, I made a few conscious decisions. I would only post things related to my art. It would be rated PG because I'm a mom and a teacher. And I would post once a day or as often as I can. And if I use music by an artist, I always make sure to name the song, credit them, and add links to their platforms. This is my first time back as a student since 1992, although I am a lifelong learner. I look forward to upping my storytelling game through digital platforms through this class.
So in this example, the student really takes charge of her own learning. She reflects on her role as a producer of information and talks through her role as an artist, and also how she utilizes social media in a very positive way.
Professor Thomas, acabamos de assistir vídeo sobre aluno que se identifica como produtor. E a questão agora ele menciona a questão do metaletramento e da narrativa digital. Ele também menciona que esse estudo, né, ele menciona o curso do programa europeu em Praga e de narrativas digitais em sua vida, né? Esse vídeo introdutório com as funções dos alunos menciona também a questão da autoavaliação intermediária com base em domínios de aprendizagem, o projeto de equipe com foco em função de colaborador e vídeo final, que é esse de autoavaliação baseado em características, como esse aluno que se identifica novamente como um produtor.
And in this example of meta-literacy in practice, it's really thinking about maker spaces, which are these spaces where learners construct all kinds of things. So they could be technology mediated, or in this visual shows, It could be an actual construction of an object. And Sarah Nagel has done some great work in this, and she wrote something for our metaliteracy.org blog where she connects metaliteracy and maker literacy. And we love this example because it shows that while clearly there's a need for metaliteracy in a fractured social media environment in online communities, we see metaliteracy really as a practice in all kinds of communities, in all kinds of spaces, no matter where a student goes throughout their life. So it's not always technology mediated. We take really a more of a multimodal approach, which means that it's really about knowledge construction using a variety of tools, whether it's technology or not.
O professor Thomas, ele gosta muito desse exemplo, que ele diz que esse exemplo, ele mostra a questão do metaletramento em makerspaces, que são espaços comunitários, né? São espaços tipo, como esse daqui, uma oficina, um ateliê, na qual a mentalidade do criador envolve a avaliação crítica de suas próprias crenças e perspectivas. E liga a questão do metaletramento e letramento dos criadores. Então, esse é um exemplo que ele mostra da questão da oficina da construção, né, do pensamento.
And the Metaliteracy Learning Collaborative has produced a number of resources, open resources that are available for your use and adaptation. And I really would like to acknowledge Kelsey O'Brien, a key member of the Learning Collaborative, who has been core in creating a number of these resources. This information is available on the metaliteracy.org website. And so there are links to all of the items and more descriptive information about each one. But there is the integrated learner figure, which you've seen. There are videos about the characteristics, roles. There is content that was created for digital badging. So there is quite a lot of information there based on their learning goals and objectives, with activities for students that can be adapted. And Tom, would you like to talk about the ones following? You're muted, Tom.
Thanks. Thanks, Trudy. One thing I'll say I want to add about the YouTube channel is that really allows, it's very possible to take some of the videos we've constructed for different projects and actually incorporate them in courses. So I've done that with my classes. We have a self-directed learning quest in a course, which is part of the digital badging content that Trudy mentioned. And again, that's something that can just be easily adapted. Everything we have here is really openly licensed and openly available. We also developed a module for this I Succeed for College Success, which is an online resource. And it's really intended for first-year students entering college. But I think that the module we created on metaliteracy is, again, easily adaptable to use any of those pieces. And in fact, it takes you through even how to create digital stories. So that's something you can adapt. And we've developed several MOOCs. And the most recent MOOC is available on Coursera. It's called Empowering Yourself in a Post-Truth World. And you can certainly use that as a resource. We have another one on Coursera called Empowering Yourself in a Connected World. And you can use those resources, or you can go back to the YouTube channel or using any of these other figures or diagrams and incorporate those in your instruction as well.
Ok. A professora Trudy, ela fala da questão do metaletramento colaborativo, né? O metaletramento que tem a figura integrada ao aluno, as suas características de aluno metaletrado, as suas funções do aluno metaletrado, os objetivos de aprendizagem, os domínios, o conteúdo digital. Depois o professor Thomas, ele fala da questão do YouTube, né, que tem vídeos incorporados nos cursos que eles lecionam. São aulas abertas com um modelo adaptável do metaletramento para a criação de histórias digitais. Depois eles mencionam algumas fontes que posteriormente a gente pode pedir para que eles coloquem no chat, como eles mencionam autores como O'Brien e outras fontes. Aí fala da questão do estudo de caso incorporado, a busca da aprendizagem autodirigida em um curso e o modelo de sucesso da faculdade, novamente com aquele diagrama que eles mencionam todas as características do aluno metaletrado.
So we thank you for the invitation to talk with you today. This is the new book that we just finished that will be coming out in the new year. We appreciate your interest in our first meta-literacy book. And thank you very much. We're available for questions, and we do hope that you show the video that you produced, which is really wonderful. Trudy?
Yes, I just would like to thank everybody for your interest and for facilitating this and for the translation of our first book. And as Tom said, we welcome questions, and it has been a pleasure.
Os autores agradecem a apresentação e a audiência de todos, e eles mencionam que esse livro vai estar disponível no final do ano. Esse livro que está apresentado aqui agora. E eles estão abertos para perguntas. Eles gostariam que fosse mostrado o vídeo, mencionado, aquele vídeo. Acho que talvez a gente possa mostrar o vídeo agora.
Pode ser, Dani. É porque eu estava deixando ele para o final, mas antes de começar as perguntas, a gente pode apresentar o livro que foi lançado no nosso Enancib e que foi traduzido pelo IBICT e que já está disponível. Então, assim, se for possível, apresenta o vídeo, depois a gente abre para perguntas.
Dr. Cecilia Leite is mentioning the book that was published by IBICT. We want to show you the book that was translated into Portuguese. I think they are going to show you now. First is the video.
O metaletramento, reinventando o letramento informacional para capacitar os alunos, é uma tradução do livro escrito em 2014 por 2 pesquisadores norte-americanos, Tom McKay, professor de Artes e Mídia na Escola de Artes e Humanidades do CNPq State College de Nova York, e Trudy Jacobson, ilustre bibliotecária e chefe do Departamento de Letramento Informacional da Universidade de Albany, em Nova York. Os alunos de hoje se comunicam, criam e compartilham informações usando uma variedade de tecnologias de informação, como mídia social, blogs, microblogs, wikis, dispositivos e aplicativos móveis, redes virtuais e MOOCs. Em metaletramento, reinventando o letramento informacional para capacitar os alunos, os respeitados especialistas em letramento informacional apresentam uma estrutura abrangente para a teoria do letramento informacional que se baseia em décadas de prática, enquanto reconhece o conhecimento necessário para um ambiente de informação expansivo e interativo. O conceito de metaletramento expande o escopo das habilidades de informação tradicionais: determinar, acessar, localizar, compreender, produzir e usar informações, para incluir a produção colaborativa e o compartilhamento de informações em ambientes digitais participativos. Colaborar, produzir e compartilhar, prevalecentes no mundo atual. Combinando teoria e estudos de caso, os autores mostram que o letramento informacional midiático, visual, o letramento digital e uma série de outros letramentos específicos para a tecnologia são essenciais para cidadãos informados no século XXI. O livro oferece uma estrutura para se engajar nos ambientes de informação de hoje, como colaboradores ativos, autorreflexivos e críticos para esses espaços colaborativos. Também são abordados tópicos como metadados, web semântica, metacognição, educação aberta, ensino à distância e narrativa digital. Esta abordagem de ponta para o letramento informacional ajudará os alunos a compreenderem o pensamento crítico e a reflexão, tão necessários para se envolverem em espaços de tecnologia como produtores, colaboradores e compartilhadores experientes.
Dani, vamos às perguntas.
Ok, tem uma pergunta aqui da professora Elda. We have one question here from Professor Elda. It was a shame ACRL did not incorporate the metalworking framework in 2016. Do you believe that in the next renovation they will adopt metaleteracy?
There was just sort of quite a story about the meta-literacy elements in the ACRL framework, and it went through several iterations or changes as we worked. At first, it was very it was called out. It was very obvious, the meta-literacy components, but we presented drafts of the framework to the community of academic librarians, and they found having sort of different models incorporated in one to be confusing. So what we did at that point was we integrated it with the threshold concepts or the key concepts that we were working with. It did get somewhat watered down. There still was an emphasis, though, at times on metacognition, although not as much as we would have liked. And there is an article about that I wrote with two colleagues that emphasizes there could have been more about metacognition. There was some on learner as producer, but again, not nearly as strongly emphasized as in meta-literacy.
Professora Trudy disse que era muito óbvio, nós apresentamos drafts, né? Tínhamos diferentes modelos que achamos confusos e integramos ele ao nosso trabalho. Ela disse que tem um artigo sobre isso, que ela escreveu com dois outros amigos. Ela fala da questão dos alunos, né, e do metaletramento. Alguém tem mais alguma pergunta? Professor Elda is saying thank you. And she's saying that I see that there is a paradigm shift. Could this be the reason for the researchers' initial resistance?
Decidedly. I think that's a good way to characterize it. What we were proposing and what has come about as the framework was quite different from what there was before. And you could see that in the slides. It was very skills-based in the 2000 interpretation. And we were changing it to a conceptual framework. Part of the issue is that, like other academics, librarians often are not sort of trained to teach. And so engaging in a different way, and also having less time to do this was very much a challenge. And so I think this paradigm shift, sort of complicating it in a way, um, made for some resistance. The framework has been adopted by a great number of people. Some people had been doing these kinds of things already, but sort of formalizing it um, was definitely a shift.
Bom, a professora Trude disse que essa é uma boa forma de caracterizar o que eles propuseram, e que a estrutura, né, que outros bibliotecários não estão treinados para lecionar, e que o tempo dedicado a isso é extremo, e isso causou alguma resistência.
If I could add something too, is that in some ways it's also even though they're separate, there's some alignment, and it's interesting that when we speak with people, I think that practitioners bring it together in practice. When we would go out to conferences, before the pandemic, we often heard people say, or librarians say, that the idea of meta-literacy captured what they were doing, what they hoped to do. So there's something about it that resonates with many people. And we, in our work too, we've found some intersection. So we recently wrote a chapter with our colleague Kelsey O'Brien, where we connect specifically the meta-literacy characteristics to the ACRL framework. So there's, I think in theory and practice, actually, there's some interesting potential for alignment, even though the two models have kind of moved in their own direction.
I wonder if Daniela is muted.
I'm sorry. Eu só dizendo que o professor Thomas ele estava falando dos dois modelos, que eles têm alguma ligação, mas que são modelos distintos. Então, nesse sentido, existem características comuns, mas também distintas. Ana Lúcia Guimarães, she has a question. She's asking, how do the authors believe that going forward, the concept of meta-working can merge with or replace the UNESCO concept of media and information literacy?
Do you want me to start, Trudy, or do you want to start?
Would you like to, Tom?
I hope I understand the question. It is interesting that one irony is that when we first started talking about meta-literacy and we started building this concept, part of it was because we felt that there were all these other literacy types out there, and we're trying to bring things together in a more comprehensive way. Not saying that just one literacy is going to do it for everything, but trying to better understand what these connections are. And yet now here it is, we have a new literacy that we're really working on, meta-literacy. So it is in many ways separate, but I think you can find those connections. So how this will evolve, I don't know. I think that I think there's so many considerations, certainly with the ACRL framework, because it's really supported by a professional organization that defines what the framework is within a particular profession. And we're researchers and practitioners doing our own thing, and we're bringing together all these different ideas, I think, in interesting ways. So I'm not sure if it's about meta-literacy replacing information literacy. Initially, we envisioned information literacy as a meta-literacy, but it's really evolved in different ways. So I think it's actually okay for this to continue to move forward. We just see so much potential for making connections with meta-literacy in other areas. So for example, the new book is really about the learner as producer. And through that, we've developed chapters on multimodality that we're really excited about, open learning that we're really excited about. So it's this, and we really, in the first chapter, we really explain all of these components I think in a really comprehensive way. So that's my response. I'm sure Trudy has ideas about it as well.
Daniela, would you like to translate Tom's first, and then I'll go forward?
Sure, we're happy to do that. Ok, o professor Thomas, ele disse que tem tantas considerações da questão da estrutura que eles, como pesquisadores, como professores, não se prendem sobre a questão do metaletramento tomando o lugar do letramento. São conexões do metaletramento com todas as outras áreas, que o livro é justamente sobre isso, sobre os componentes que embasam essa questão toda do metaletramento.
So this might take the discussion in a slightly different direction and moving away from the United States. But Tom and I get notices on Google and ResearchGate and academia.edu about sources that are citing our work. And this Portuguese edition of Meta-literacy is the first translation, but and ALA editions are working with a library in China that is planning to translate our books into Chinese. And we are also getting just sort of an amazing range of places that these researchers who are citing our work are from. So just thinking, recently there was something from Lapland, which was somewhat surprising to me, and Bosnia, and we're working with a couple of researchers there. South Africa. I mean, it's really pretty amazing, the scope of the interest in meta-literacy.
Ok, a professora Trudy falou que essa discussão ela leva para outro lugar, longe dos Estados Unidos, que são sobre as fontes. Aí ela menciona a questão da primeira tradução para o português e agora para o chinês. Ele diz que estão em contato também com a China e estão trabalhando com pesquisadores da Bósnia e de tantos outros lugares do mundo. We have another question. Are there substantial differences between meta-literacy and critical information literacy? Ariadne is asking that. Ariadne Chloe. You want me to repeat?
I think I got it. Tom, did you want a repetition?
Okay, are there substantial differences between meta-literacy and critical information literacy?
I think that the focus is different. I think that there are some areas of overlap, but I really think that we're focusing sort of on the learner, the characteristics, the domains, the roles, which is a different emphasis than critical information literacy has. Tom, did you want to add?
Yes, I agree. I think there's definitely overlap with critical information literacy. In the very first article, we did mention that and explore that. I think in meta-literacy, it's very much focused on learner as producer and constructing knowledge as an individual and in collaboration with others. And not everyone's, I think the research shows that we are all social learners, but I think we also have self-directed learners. So there's an interesting bridge there too between someone who really is self-aware of themselves as a learner, as a self-directed learner, but also understanding the capacity to learn with others and in collaboration. So I think that that's really what's unique about meta-literacy, even though there's clearly overlap, as Trudy said. So I do think it's about the learner understanding themselves and then understanding other learners, which is an idea that's been emerging in practice, because I've been having students say to me that, and write in their responses, that they not only better understand themselves, but they understand their peers. And I hadn't really heard that before. And I just thought that was interesting that through this kind of foregrounding the learning process through metacognition, that they better understand what's happening for themselves and within their community, which I think is very positive.
Ok. Professor Thomas, ele diz que somos alunos sociais, que ele entende a questão da importância da colaboração, dos alunos se entenderem a si próprios, da colaboração entre eles com os outros e a si mesmo. E o foco, e já a professora Trudy, ela disse que o foco é diferente, que o aluno ele tem a questão do domínio das suas funções. E ela menciona que o primeiro artigo deles foi justamente explorar essa questão do metaletramento e do letramento crítico, né? Então, em que a pesquisa mostra essa diferença, que somos alunos sociais, sim, mas temos questões importantes na colaboração entre os pares. Okay, we have another question from, let me see here, from Marcos Rogério Martins. He is asking, how did the teachers face the doubts about the difference between metalworking and other literacy? Can metalworking contribute to the concept of scientific literacy? What is the difference between scientific literacy and metal literacy?
I think this, again, goes back to what we were saying with the difference with the critical information literacy. And it is the focus on the learner. Although meta-literacy evolved sort of from a dissatisfaction with information literacy at that point in time, where as the concept of meta-literacy is evolving, it really is focusing more on learning. And I think this is coming through in the responses we've been giving. Learning about oneself, learning about one's information needs, but learning is becoming the focus, and a very reflective learning. And so for example, scientific literacy, I think the overlap is in recognizing one's own needs and dispositions in connection with that broader concept. Daniela, maybe I'll turn it over to you, and I bet Tom has something he'd like to say then too.
Ok. Ok, a professora Trudy, ela falou que a informação crítica está intimamente ligada ao letramento, e que o aprendizado, ele se tornou o foco da questão, que é importante reconhecer as suas próprias necessidades nesse processo todo. Professor Thomas?
Yes, I think it's interesting, and I agree with everything that Trudy said, is that I think what's interesting about meta-literacy as a holistic model, as a comprehensive model, is that while it's different than other sort of literacies, there's interesting alignment. And so, for example, in two of our books are we co-authored, and two we edited because we wanted to bring in different perspectives. And we've had a wonderful chapter about scientific literacy by two authors who really investigated that theme. So I think in the way that Trudy talked about it, I think there's ways of talking about these other literacies through the lens of meta-literacy, because it's this holistic model really about the learner.
Ok, professor Thomas, ele falou que realmente tem uma interesse e ligação entre essas duas questões, e que nos dois livros deles, eles mencionam as diferentes perspectivas do letramento científico, mas que tudo está ligado ao aluno. We have to end now this session, the presentation. I don't think we have no more time, and I will ask Professor Thomas and Professor Trudy to end to say their final words to the audience, please. The floor is yours.
Ok. Dani, pode encerrar, eu quero só agradecer.
Ah, sim, eu pedi para que o professor Thomas e a professora Trudy deem suas últimas palavras, e depois aí a professora Cecília. Okay, Professor Thomas, do you have something to say to the audience? And Professor Trudy, please have the floor yours.
Well, thank you very much. We are so honored that you've published that you've translated our book, our first meta-literacy book. We're really excited about that, and we're happy to be here. We're thrilled to be here, and we just thank you for all of your interest in this concept and in our work.
Professor Thomas disse que está muito agradecido por terem traduzido o livro deles, que ele está muito honrado de estar participando dessa apresentação, e que a honra é toda deles.
And I would like to echo Tom's thanks, and also thank you for the very thoughtful questions that you've asked. And we are happy to engage with anybody who would like to contact us and talk with you further. Thank you very much.
A professora Trudy ecoou as mesmas palavras do professor Thomas e agradeceu pelas ótimas perguntas elaboradas para os professores, e agradece a todos pela participação e pela audiência. Now, Dr. Cecilia will say some words, final words, to both Professor Thomas and Professor Trudy.
Perfeito. Antes de agradecer aos professores, eu queria agradecer mais uma vez a Daniela Cunha pela tradução da palestra, a Ana Lúcia pela tradução do livro, que foi fundamental, ela e a Deise, para que isso acontecesse, a Dalva pela revisão ortográfica, o Enonir pela diagramação e elaboração do e-book, e por toda a equipe de editoração. E, acima de tudo, essa equipe nossa aí da COEP, que, em nome do Gustavo Saldanha, eu agradeço, e aos professores, e antes deles, a Elda, que é uma doutoranda da UNB, que foi quem fez essa conexão e possibilitou que este evento, que este livro, pudesse estar disponível para os brasileiros e para todos aqueles de língua portuguesa. E para os professores, meu muito obrigado.
Okay, Dr. Cecilia Leite, she wants to thank, first of all, Daniela for the translation of this presentation, for Ana Lúcia and I forgot the name, Ana Lúcia and Daisy for the translation of the book, for Dalva for the help of doing. A Dalva pela apresentação?
Pela revisão.
Ok. Dalva for the revision of the book, and for Elda for the connection with the both you professors, Thomas and Professor Trudy. And she is very honored to have you here again, And she's thank you both for the wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Então, com essas palavras, acho que nós finalizamos. I think with these words we finalize the presentation, and we thank you again, and have a good day. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.